There is a moment, and most people never find it, where something shifts inside you. It is not loud. It does not arrive with fanfare or celebration. It comes quietly, like the first breath after nearly drowning. One day, you simply realize that you have been living as a passenger in your own life, that your reactions, your moods, your choices, all of it, have been authored by forces outside of you, by other people's opinions, by circumstances you never chose, by fears you never examined, by habits you never questioned. And in that moment of recognition, something ancient and powerful begins to stir. The Stoics called it your hegemonikon, your ruling faculty, your inner command center, and the second you reclaim it, nothing in your life can ever be the same again. Welcome to Stoic Zeno. This channel exists for people who are done drifting, for those who are tired of being pushed around by life and are ready to take the wheel. Not through aggression or force, but through the quiet, devastating power of self-mastery. If that is you, then you are in exactly the right place. Before we go further, if this kind of content speaks to something in you, hit that like button right now. Leave a comment below telling me one area of your life where you feel most out of control. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Stoic Zeno so you never miss a lesson. Now, let us begin. Think about the last time someone said something that ruined your entire day. Maybe it was a harsh word from a coworker, a dismissive comment from a family member, a passive-aggressive message from someone you trusted. You replayed it for hours. It sat in your chest like a stone. It infected your thoughts, your mood, your sleep, and the worst part, that person went home and forgot about it entirely. They ate dinner. They laughed at something on television. They slept peacefully, while you were dismantled. Now ask yourself, who was in control of you in that moment? Not you. This is the prison most people live inside. And the cruelest part is that the bars are invisible. You cannot see what is controlling you. You think you are reacting to reality, but you are not. You are reacting to your interpretation of reality. And that interpretation has been shaped by years of conditioning, by wounds you have not healed, by beliefs you adopted without ever choosing them. The Stoics understood this with a depth that still feels radical today. Over 2,000 years ago, Epictetus, a man who was literally a slave, who had no freedom of movement, no property, no legal rights, wrote words that shook the ancient world and continue to shake ours. He said, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." Read that again. Not by the things which happen, by the opinions about the things. The event is neutral. Your story about the event is where the suffering lives. This is not a philosophy of denial. Epictetus was not saying that pain is not real. He was pointing at something more precise and more liberating. That between the thing that happens to you and the way you respond to it, there is a space. And in that space lives your freedom. The question Stoicism asks, the question it has always asked, is whether you are going to live in that space consciously, or whether you are going to let the world collapse it entirely and turn you into a machine that simply reacts. Most people are machines. They do not know it. They think they are living, but they are executing patterns. Someone disrespects them, the machine fires anger. Something goes wrong, the machine fires panic. Someone leaves, the machine fires despair. The response is automatic, predictable, and always in proportion to the external trigger, which means the external world has total control. Whoever or whatever pushes the right buttons owns you completely. The moment you stop being controlled is the moment you stop being a machine. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire in the known world. He commanded legions. He held the lives of millions in his hands. And yet he began each morning not by attending to the empire, but by attending to himself. The Meditations, his private journal never meant for publication, opens with something that should stop you cold. He does not begin with strategy. He does not begin with ambition or glory. He begins with preparation for difficulty. He writes, "Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial." He was preparing himself for the day's provocations before they arrived. He was rehearsing his own sovereignty in advance, not because he was pessimistic, not because he expected the worst, but because he understood something that most modern people have completely lost. You do not find your center in the middle of chaos. You bring your center into chaos with you, or you do not have one. This is what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity, the deliberate daily practice of imagining difficulty, not to become afraid of it, but to become familiar with it. When you have already sat with the possibility of loss, of conflict, of disappointment, when you have already walked through it in your mind, it loses its power to ambush you. It cannot shock you into reaction because you have already chosen your response in advance. This is the first pillar of reclaiming control. Sovereignty over your inner state before the day touches you. How many people do you know who begin their mornings by immediately handing their nervous system to their phone? Who open their eyes and before they have taken a single conscious breath, they are scrolling through a stream of outrage, comparison, noise, and stimulation designed by engineers to keep them agitated and engaged. They hand over their attention, the most precious thing they own, to a machine built to monetize their distraction, and they wonder why they feel scattered, why they feel reactive, why they cannot hold a thought longer than 30 seconds. You cannot reclaim control of your life until you reclaim control of your mornings. This is not motivational advice. This is Stoic architecture. The shape of your day is determined in the first 20 minutes of consciousness. What you feed your mind in those minutes becomes the lens through which you see everything that follows. Marcus Aurelius did not look at his phone. He looked at his thoughts, and he examined them with ruthless honesty. Here is something the Stoics knew that modern psychology is only beginning to quantify. Almost everything that torments you is not in the present moment. It is in your story about what might happen, or your story about what already happened. The anxiety that grips you at 2 a.m. is not about something that is happening right now. It is about a future that has not arrived, projected through a mind that has been trained to anticipate threat. The resentment that poisons your relationships is not alive in the present moment. It is kept alive by a story you keep telling yourself about the past, a past that no longer exists anywhere except inside your own skull. Epictetus wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." This is the doctrine of amor fati, love of fate, taken to its fullest expression, not passive acceptance, not defeated resignation, but a radical active embrace of what is, because what is the only thing that is actually real. Everything else, your fears, your resentments, your what-ifs, is a story, and you are so skilled at telling that story that you have mistaken it for reality. The moment you stop fighting what is and start working with what is, the moment you stop demanding that reality be different from what it is right now, a kind of power becomes available to you that no amount of external success can manufacture. Seneca understood this dimension of control as intimately as anyone. He lived at the edge of Rome's most dangerous court, navigating emperors who could order his death on a whim. He was exiled, he was threatened, he lost enormous wealth and status. And through all of it, he wrote letters to his friend Lucilius that remain among the most searingly honest documents in human history. He wrote, "Omnia aliena sunt tempus tantum nostrum est." Everything is alien to us. Time alone is ours. Not your reputation, not your wealth, not even your body. Ultimately, time, the way you choose to spend your attention, your energy, your consciousness, that is the only thing that is truly yours. And you are spending it reacting to things that are not in your control, being moved by forces you have never examined, living a life that was largely designed for you by accident. This is not a criticism. It is a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is always the beginning of healing. Let us talk about the people in your life who control you, because most of us have them, and we do not call them controllers. We call them family. We call them bosses. We call them partners. We call them society. There is a difference between being influenced by people and being controlled by them. Influence is healthy. You love someone, and their well-being matters to you. That is influence. That is relationship. That is how human beings are meant to connect. Control is different. Control is when another person's mood determines your mood. When their approval is required before you can feel good about yourself. When their disappointment dismantles you. When you reshape who you are based on what they seem to want you to be. The Stoics had a word for the kind of person who has achieved freedom from this: the sage. Not because the sage does not love people, not because the sage is cold or indifferent, but because the sage's inner state is not for sale. It cannot be purchased by your approval. It cannot be destroyed by your disapproval. It is grounded in something that no one else can touch: virtue, reason, and the daily practice of living according to nature. You do not have to be a sage to begin this work. You just have to notice. Notice the next time someone's mood begins to colonize yours. Notice the next time you change what you say because you are afraid of how it will land. Notice the next time you feel a flash of anxiety because someone important has not responded to your message. These are the moments where the invisible bars become briefly visible. These are the moments where you can choose differently. The Stoic tool for this is deceptively simple: the dichotomy of control. Epictetus built his entire philosophy on it. At the opening of the Enchiridion, his handbook for living, he writes, "Of things, some are in our power and others are not. In our power, our judgments, our intentions, our desires, our responses. Not in our power, our bodies, our reputations, our property, other people, outcomes, most human suffering. And I mean most, not some. comes from treating things that are not in our power as if they are, and treating things that are in our power as if they are not. You spend enormous energy trying to control other people's perceptions of you. That is not in your power. You spend almost no energy examining and disciplining your own inner response to difficulty. That is entirely in your power. You have the ratio inverted. And inverting it back, that inversion is the moment everything changes. This work is not comfortable. Let us be honest about that. Reclaiming control is not a motivational poster. It is not a morning routine hack. It is a confrontation with yourself, with the parts of yourself you have been avoiding, with the patterns you have been repeating, with the stories you have been too afraid to examine. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Sounds simple. It is profoundly demanding because there is almost always a gap between what we know to be right and what we do, between what we know to be true and what we say. That gap is the distance between who we are and who we are capable of becoming. The Stoics called this gap the battleground, and they were not romantic about it. Seneca, in one of his most searingly honest letters, admits, "I am not yet a friend to myself." A man who spent his entire life teaching Stoic philosophy. A man whose letters on virtue and self-discipline are read 2,000 years later. And he sits with his friend Lucilius and says, "I am still working on this." That is the honesty this philosophy demands. Not performance, not the curated image of someone who has it figured out, but the relentless, daily, unglamorous work of actually looking at yourself, at your reactions, your fears, your vanities, your resentments, and choosing again and again to respond rather than react. The person who controls themselves controls their life, not the outcomes of their life. The Stoics were never so naive as to promise you outcomes. They knew that sickness comes, that loss comes, that failure comes, that people you love will disappoint you and leave you and die. They promised you none of that would be prevented. What they promised was this: none of it has to own you. There is a kind of person you have probably encountered, maybe rarely, but you remember them when you did. They carry themselves differently, not with arrogance, not with the stiff performance of someone trying to look unbothered, but with something genuine, a kind of settled quality. You can throw an insult at them and it does not land the way it does with everyone else. You can bring them chaos and they do not amplify it. You can try to pull them into your panic and they remain somehow still. This is not a personality type. This is not a gift some people are born with. This is a practice. This is what Stoicism looks like when it is lived rather than just studied. Marcus Aurelius, governing an empire under constant threat, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He was not speaking from a place of comfort. He was speaking from the middle of campaigns, of plague, of political betrayal, of the slow death of people he loved. He wrote these words to himself because he needed them. Because even for Marcus Aurelius, the work was never finished, and that is the most liberating thing about this philosophy. It does not ask you to arrive, it asks you to practice. Every morning when you choose to meet the day with intention rather than reactivity, that is the practice. Every moment you pause before responding to a provocation, that is the practice. Every time you catch yourself suffering over something outside your control and consciously redirect your energy to what is inside your control, that is the practice. Every time you choose honesty over performance, virtue over convenience, reason over impulse, that is the practice. You do not do this and suddenly become unshakable. You do this and you become slightly more unshakable than you were yesterday, and then again the next day, and the next. This is how character is built, not in dramatic transformations, in the accumulation of small, unglamorous daily choices. Let us bring this home with something practical, because the Stoics were not theorists, they were practitioners. Epictetus ran a school. Marcus governed an empire. Seneca advised emperors and ran a financial empire of his own. These were men with real lives, real pressures, real failures, and they gave us tools, not abstractions. The first tool is the morning examination. Before you do anything else, before you check your phone, before you speak to anyone, before the demands of the day reach you, sit with yourself for 5 minutes. Ask, what is likely to challenge my equanimity today? Where am I likely to be provoked? What do I want from this day that is not in my control? And how do I release that? What is in my control, and how do I commit to it? This is not journaling as productivity. This is the Stoic practice of preparing your inner state before the outer world arrives. The second tool is the evening review. Seneca described his nightly practice of reviewing the day's actions, not to punish himself but to learn from himself. What weakness did I overcome today? Where did I fall short? What would I do differently? This is not self-flagellation. This is the honest accounting of a person who takes their own character seriously. The third tool is the pause, between stimulus and response. In any moment of provocation, an insult, a disappointment, a fear, before you do anything, pause. Breathe, ask, is this in my control? If not, what is the most virtuous response available to me right now? This pause, practiced daily, becomes the most powerful thing you own. It is the moment where you choose to be a person rather than a reaction. The fourth tool is voluntary hardship. Seneca wrote about deliberately choosing discomfort, cold water, hunger, sleeping on the floor, not as punishment but as training. The point was to discover that the things you are afraid of losing cannot actually touch your essential self. When you voluntarily experience difficulty, you prove to yourself that you are larger than your comfort. And when you know that, nothing outside of you has the power to break you. The fifth tool is amor fati, love of fate, the deliberate practice of not just tolerating what happens but finding value in it. Every obstacle, every loss, every humiliation. Practiced Stoics ask, what does this make possible that would not have been possible otherwise? Not as a coping mechanism, as a genuine reorientation toward reality. The Stoic does not just endure difficulty, the Stoic uses it. Here is what I want to leave you with. You have been controlled by circumstances, by other people, by your own unexamined patterns. That is not a failure. That is the human condition before philosophy, before the moment of waking. But you are here, you listen to this. Something in you recognized what this was about, and that recognition is not accidental. It means there is a part of you that already knows the difference between living and drifting, between responding and reacting, between owning your life and being owned by it. The Stoics did not promise that this work would make life easy. They promised it would make you equal to life. And that is so much better. Easy life produces soft, reactive, frightened people. A life met with Stoic practice, with intention, with examined responses, with the daily reclamation of your inner territory, that life produces something else entirely. It produces a person who cannot be broken by what happens to them. It produces a person whose peace is not contingent on the world's cooperation. It produces a person who meets loss, failure, and difficulty not as disasters but as the raw material of character. Marcus Aurelius, on his deathbed, is reported to have said to those mourning around him, "Weep not for me, think rather of the pestilence and the deaths of so many others." A man at the end of his life, controlling the one thing he always could, his orientation toward reality. That is what this practice builds toward, not a destination, a direction, and the direction is toward freedom. The only freedom the Stoics ever cared about. Not political freedom, not financial freedom, not freedom from difficulty, freedom from being controlled by what you cannot control. The moment that shift happens for you, and it will if you do the work, everything changes. Not because the world changes, because you do. And when you change, the world you inhabit changes with you. The relationships that drained you begin to clarify. The fears that paralyzed you lose their grip. The opinions of others, which once held so much power over you, become simply noise. Not because you stop caring about people, but because you have found something inside yourself that is more real and more solid than any external validation could ever be. That is the promise of Stoicism. That is the promise of reclaiming control. And it begins not years from now. Not when your circumstances improve. Not when you finally have enough money, enough time, enough stability. It begins in the next decision you make, in the next moment of provocation where you choose to pause instead of react, in the next morning where you meet yourself honestly before the world has a chance to define you. It begins now. That is it for today. If this video moved something in you, if it gave you a language for something you have always felt but never quite named, do not let that feeling pass. Hit the like button. Leave a comment below. I want to know, what is the one area of your life where you are most ready to stop being controlled? Share this with someone in your life who is struggling with this right now. It might be the most valuable thing you give them today. And if you have not already, subscribe to Stoic Zeno. Every video on this channel is built for one purpose, to give you the philosophical tools to live a life that is genuinely your own. The ancient wisdom is here. The question is whether you are ready to use it. I will see you in the next one.